What's up, party people? Welcome to Nicolette Reads. I'm Nicolette. I read. Today we are going to be talking about all of the books that I read in June. And to be honest, I had a really good reading month in June, and half of that is because I decided to start rereading some books via audiobook, which was awesome. So I read 10 books in June, which is great. 4 of them I had read before, so those were rereads, and 6 of them were brand new. So I read 10 books this June, which is excellent for me, honestly. One of my best reading months this year, or possibly of my life. 6 of those were new reads to me, and 4 of them were rereads. And overall, I had a great time. So the first book that I read this month was Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. So Divine Rivals is set in a fantasy world that kind of is reminiscent of World War I era America, or England, I guess. Basically what we've got going on here is our main character works at a newspaper, and there's a war going on between 2 gods. Her brother decided to go start fighting in the war, and it's been a while. She hasn't heard from him, and she's wondering where he is. And she thinks that her best bet of being able to figure out where he is if she can get a promotion at her newspaper job and be brought up to columnist. Enter our male protagonist, who also works at the newspaper and also wants the promotion for the columnist job. Our main character misses her brother and hasn't been able to contact him. She starts writing him letters, and then she sends them underneath her wardrobe door. And she's not expecting anything to happen. It just felt like she was sending it when she was doing that. But when she opens up the wardrobe, the letter is gone. So it's vanishing. It's being sent to someone. And the premise is eventually one day a letter gets sent back, but it's not from her brother. Hint, it's from the male protagonist. That's kind of the whole point of the book. So you follow these 2 characters as, you know, they're competing for this job. They're trying to figure out what happened to her brother. There's a war going on between these gods. And even though you're in a fantasy setting, it feels really almost like historical fiction without the historical accuracy. I really wanted to like this book. I didn't. I gave it like a 2.75. My main issue with this book is that I forgot we were in a fantasy world other than the letters disappearing underneath the door. So it just read like historically inaccurate historical fiction about World War I, and I'm not interested in war movies or novels. You know, unless there's like swords and that kind of thing, but that's not what we're dealing with here. We've got grenades and trenches and mustard gas type war, and it takes her probably at least a third of the book, felt more like half the book, to kind of accept her call to action. We're getting a lot of her, this is my ordinary world, here's my call to action, but then nothing else really happens for probably 50% of this book, and then suddenly everything happens, and all the while you forgot that there's even a fantasy element happening. We don't talk about the gods really. I have really no idea much about either of the 2 that are at war here or what happened to all the other gods. There was no other like type of magic other than the magical typewriter situation, and I was bored by it. Felt like 2 separate novels. I wasn't bored, it just felt like 2 separate novels. It felt like one was taking place where she's in this newspaper world, and then hard switch to war. Where was the fantasy? I don't know. But at the end, I was like, oh, there's gonna be more in this series. And depending on the description of the next one, I might pick it up. I'm not completely convinced that I will. However, I do enjoy that I have this really nice copy, and I have one from Owl Crate as well, and so it can live on my shelf. I'll allow it to be there. Wasn't my favorite book, took too long, nothing really happened of note. Our main character didn't really do anything of note. It was fine. Would I recommend this book? If you like World War I era type stuff, you will love this book. I don't. So now, it wasn't for me, but hey, not everything has to be for me, you know what I mean? Okay, the next book that I read in June is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This is a satirical novel that is not in R.F. Kuang's normal realm, which would be fantasy writing. This is just a satirical literary novel about the publishing industry. And what I found very striking and bizarre about this book is that I was feeling very meta. I only started this YouTube channel, like a couple months ago, and within this novel, she talks about how BookTube and book subscription boxes have become such a huge part of the publishing industry, especially specifically for, you know, fantasy, YA, or like new adult, young adult, whatever, authors, and how it has influenced, you know, these people, these characters' careers and the way their books sell and, you know, all that jazz. So basically what happens in this book is we have one author who's white and not doing so hot, like her books aren't selling very well, etc. And then we have another author who's Asian and she is doing great. How do you describe something like this? Anyway, so the Asian author is friends with the white author, and sort of, and unexpectedly the Asian author dies. And the white author discovers a finished manuscript that the Asian author, her name's Athena, I don't want to call her the Asian author anymore, that Athena had written, and so she steals it and tweaks it a little bit and then publishes it as her own. Her fans accuse her of, you know, trying to make her name, because she changes her author name to something more ethnically ambiguous. She uses an ethnically ambiguous author photo, and you kind of are just following along as this lie wrapped up in a riddle of her life is now unraveling the consequences of basically stealing, plagiarizing the work of this author, Athena, and how it's going to affect her life moving forward personally and also within the publishing industry and her own writing career. So it's funny. It felt so bizarrely meta, and I really liked it a lot. It's also my first R.F. Kuang book, and I thought that there were so many times I was highlighting things in this book that even though it's like satire and literary fiction, it was just really beautifully written, and I really enjoyed it. So I gave this one a 4 stars, and now I'm excited to read more R.F. Kuang in the future. Okay, the next book I read is Fairy Tale by Stephen King. I bought this like when it came out, which I guess was probably within the last year or so. And it's just been sitting on my shelf. I haven't really been feeling like reading it because it's kind of thick, and, you know, I had other priorities, things that were higher up on my TBR, and I wanted to kind of move through everything on my shelf that I hadn't read yet, and so I wanted to start with some of the ones that I've had for a while. So I figured I would go ahead and get the audiobook for this one, so I did. And I have to say, not great. That's not to say that the person who did the audiobook didn't do a good job. I'm sure they did a great job as far as they could make this book be. I gave it 2 stars. It kind of had a similar problem as Divine Rivals, where it felt like 2 different books smashed together. So for the first half of this ginormous book, like this much, you're getting a story about like a high school age boy who befriends a curmudgeon-y old man, which I love a curmudgeon-y old man. He also befriends the old man's dog, who is also an old dog that has hip dysplasia. So it kind of hit a little bit too close to home for me. I almost DNF'd this book 2 different times for 2 different reasons. I was gonna DNF it in the beginning because I'd cried 3 times because I was talking about this old dog with hip dysplasia, and I had an old dog with hip dysplasia, and it really tore me up when she died. So I wasn't emotionally prepared for the probability that the dog will die, right? So I was like, I don't think I can do this, but I just kind of powered through because it was the audiobook and I would listen to it when I was making dinner and whatever. And then it has this really prolonged setup to this world that's completely different than the reality of the world. And when we finally get there, it's like halfway through the book, and then basically you're just walking around, and the premise is that all the fairy tales, you know, like Grimm's or like Hans Christian Andersen, all of them are real, and they came from a world, and we're the fake world, not the real world. We're the fairy tale world, Earth, you know? So our versions of the fairy tales were inspired by what was happening in like the real world, which is the fairy tale world. I don't know, man. It goes from this really nice, loving story about this young man and his friend, the curmudgeon old man and the old dog, to something completely different, where I didn't really care about any of the side characters. I didn't care about the stakes anymore. I only cared about the dog. And I won't tell you what happens with the dog. It's a whole thing in the book. But I did not enjoy myself. The end, I was like, okay, glad I finished it. The other thing I was gonna DNF this for the second time is because after the heart-wrenching beginning where I wanted to DNF it because it was so sad, I wanted to DNF the second half because I was bored. Didn't really care what happened at the end, and I forgot like whatever it is that happens in the end. There might be a metaphor somewhere inside of this book because the kid and his dad get a nice relationship eventually, but that's not really central to the plot, or if there is a metaphor in here, it went right over my head. I don't think there is. Also, Stephen King, he's getting up there in age, and this book is about a high schooler, and he was using words like awesome sauce. I was like, is that how he thinks that we talk, or is he being ironic? Is this person being satirical? I don't understand. You know, so this book was not awesome sauce, and I don't recommend it. Don't spend your time on it. It's kind of cute cover, that's it. That's all it's good for. Okay, swiftly coming off the tails of that, I read The Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi by Shannon Chakraborty, and oh my gosh, this was so much fun. So this is a novel about a lady pirate who is retired from her pirate life. Now she just wants to like raise her kid and like chill and not have to worry about, you know, swashbuckling and, you know, sword fighting, whatever that comes around with the pirates. She just wants to hang out and, you know, have her family. However, she is approached with a proposition for a job that just sounds really good and would set her up for the rest of her life, and, you know, the reward money is good and it doesn't sound too complicated, yada yada. So she accepts, and in order to fulfill this task that she has been tasked with, she has to get her whole group of buddies back together, get the gang all back together, find their old ship, and do this whole adventure. And it turns into something much larger than anticipated. The stakes are just the right amount for this type of novel, and I came to really enjoy all of the characters and the relationships they had between them. It was, you know, a little bit of a found family, in addition to them all having families that they also love. So it didn't give the depressing, you know, I don't like my own family, so I chose a different family. It was, in addition to the family I love, I also have this family that I've created, which I thought was really nice. And the plot itself is actually very interesting. It read like a Pirates of the Caribbean movie almost. It was just so much fun, I think. And the main character, Amina Al-Sarafi, is just a hoot. She's hilarious. I loved following along on her adventures and how she was handling things and how capable she was, even though she's like, I don't want to do this anymore. My back hurts. I'm an adult. I don't want to do this. But she's still a badass. And so the whole thing was a great time. I think there's actually going to be more in this series, the way they set it up. So it's just like a little treat. This book is so much fun. It's a quest that our pirate captain goes on with her little found family to deal with this guy.
He's a guy
who's causing trouble, right? And the way that it's told is kind of like interview style, kind of like Daisy Jones and the Six, or like The Name of the Wind, how he's, in The Name of the Wind, he's relating his story to somebody else so that they can write it down or whatever. That's the style that this book is written in, and I thought it was really great in that way as well. So I definitely recommend this if you want something fun to pick up. Can't go wrong. This one's really good. 5 stars. Okay, the next thing I read is A Flicker in the Dark by Stacey Willingham. I wanted to be scared, so I Googled what's the best, you know, thriller, whatever, on book of the month, because I don't read a lot of these, so I didn't really know, and I didn't want to pay for like a brand new hardcover of something like this, so I figured I'll just add one on to my book of the month. So a lot of people recommended this one, and so I read it. And it was fun. It was interesting. It was like watching, you know, like a crime series, a crime drama on Netflix, but I was not scared. I wasn't scared one teeny bit. Not even at the one part that could have been scary. I wasn't scared. And I'm an easily scared person. I'm not a horror person. I don't do jump scares. I don't do gore. I don't do anything like that. And I was not scared at all. But there were twists in here that I saw coming, but there were twists in here that I did not see coming. So for that, I do give it applause. At the end, you just kind of have to sit with what happened and be like, were there clues that that's how this was gonna go? And the answer is yes. So it's not like she just threw in this weird twist at the end and just be like, gotcha. You could look back and see how we got to this point. And I think it was really well done. I just was looking for something to freak me out a little bit, and I was not freaked out a little bit. I was not freaked out a lot of it. I wasn't freaked out at all. So for that, I gave it 3.5 stars because it was fun, it was interesting, good twist at the end, was not scary. What are you gonna do? Maybe I'll do like some horror, figure out what people's scariest books are, and then I'll try to read one of those. Okay, so the next book that I wanted to read is The Lost Metal by Brando Sando, which if you don't know what Brando Sando writes, he writes fantasy novels, a bunch of them. They all mostly exist in this thing called the Cosmere, which is his universe. Within his universe, all of his books take place on different planets and are all interconnected. You get the gist of it, right? So there's Mistborn Era 1, which takes place further back in time than Mistborn Era 2 does. Mistborn Era 1 is Avatar: The Last Airbender to Mistborn Era 2, which is more The Legend of Korra as far as the way the technology is set up, okay? Are you with me? So anyway, I read all of them like 2 years ago, and I never got around to reading The Lost Metal when it came out more recently than that, and I had some catching up to do. So after I finished Rhythm of War, I was like, I want to read Lost Metal. But then I felt it had been too long since I had read the first 3 books in Mistborn Era 2, so in order to get to The Lost Metal, I listened to the first 3 Mistborn Era 2 books on audiobook. And let me tell you something, as a person who isn't a huge audiobook fan, these audiobooks were great. I loved them. Wayne is my favorite character. If you know, you know. The guy who does the audiobooks for these, Michael Kramer, does a fantastic job. So we have The Alloy of Law, Shadows of Self, and The Bands of Mourning. And you know what? These were already 5-star books for me from the first time I read them. And going through and reading them again the second time, especially with the audiobook, I was like, can you give it more than 5 stars? Can you give it like 5.5, 5 and a plus sign, a 5+? I just love these books. They bring me joy. They feel like coming home. Anyway, so I had a great time rereading the first 3 of Mistborn Era 2, which led me to read The Lost Metal, which continues our adventure. So in these books, basically you have Wax and Wayne, and they are Elementers, which means that they can consume flakes of metal and then burn them, and they can then get certain abilities from doing that. They both used to be lawmen in the Roughs, which are kind of like a bounty hunter in cowboy time, but now they live in the city, and there's this whole conspiracy going on where there's a big bad guy, you know, amongst the noble people. And so they are teaming up and trying to figure out who is doing what and for what reason, and it's so much fun. So the first 3 books, excellent. This is a 4th one and the end of Mistborn Era 2. I thoroughly enjoyed myself, just like I always do. If you're comparing this book to, say, like things outside of the Cosmere, this is a 5-star book. But if I'm comparing books within the Cosmere against each other, I would say the first 3 of Mistborn Era 2 are 5 stars, and this one is a 4-star. I have qualms with the ending. And that's all I'm gonna say about that. If you have read it, we could talk about it, but I'm not giving anything away for anybody, and you can't make me. But I have qualms, and it knocked it down a whole star, okay? Finally, the last book that I read in June was Elantris, another Brandon Sanderson novel. I basically did this because once I had read all 4 of these ones, I was on a roll, especially with the audiobooks. So I listened to the audiobook for Elantris, which is actually done by a different narrator, but who does an equally as good job. And I caught a lot more stuff the second time around, especially as it relates to other books within the Cosmere. So I think I'm going to continue doing that. If you are new to the Cosmere, this is an excellent place to start. This is a standalone book in the days of yore, 10 years before the start of this book. How do you do this? How do you explain? So in this book, there's a place called Elantris, which used to be kind of like a city for humans who were turned into gods. And it was this place of radiance and beauty, and if you got turned into an Elantrian, you were basically elevated to the highest part of society, and it was awesome, right? And so then something happens, and all the people within Elantris desiccate, more or less. They fall from grace, and they are considered dead even though they're alive. Living dead people. The Elantrians basically became like lepers. Their skin went from being this like glowing, pearlescent, godlike sheen to being stripped of basically any flesh color. It's gray, it's splotched, it's whatever. Their beautiful hair that was white and lustrous before all fell out. They didn't breathe anymore, their heart didn't beat anymore, they didn't need to eat. Anytime you get injured, like if you stub your toe, that never heals. You have a stubbed toe and it hurts forever. And so imagine if something even worse happened to you, right? You're still alive, technically. You're thinking, but you're feeling that pain forever. And so Elantris was now covered in grime. And it's really dirty. Nobody goes there except the people who still are being turned into Elantrians. They have to go. The people will still be turned into Elantrians, except for instead of turning into these godlike creatures, they're turned into these lepers. So the people of the real world who aren't Elantrians still take these Elantrians and make them go to Elantris. So basically all of these leper Elantrians are existing in what used to be this glorious city, and now it's gross, grimy, and full of these Elantrians who are just struggling to exist, and they're hungry all the time, but they don't need food, so they don't get fed, which causes strife within the Elantrian society. So our main character is a princess from a different country that's not right next to Elantris, and she agrees to marry the prince from the country that basically has Elantris within its borders, which is all well and good, but when she shows up to marry this guy, he's gone. He's dead. They tell her he's dead, but because their marriage contract said that if he died while they were engaged, it basically means that she effectively married him and then now she's widowed. Whoops. Weird clause to have in a contract, but it is what it is. So now she's in this country where she's the widow of the prince, and she's widowed without even ever having met him. And plot twist, it turns out he didn't die. He got turned into an Elantrian randomly. And so he's living within Elantris. She's living in the castle where she's supposed to be married to this guy, but instead she's his widow. And all the while we have this sort of like god king figure who's trying to convert all of the people of this country from one religion into the one that's taking over the world. And so you have these 3 main characters: the man who's trying to convert everybody, the princess who shows up and is like, well, these are my people now because this is my country now, I'm married into this country and they need my help. And you have, the prince who turned into an Elantrian who is now trying to figure out how to make society in Elantris exist, because there isn't one right now. Everybody's just kind of feral lepers running around trying to find any scrap of food they can, including eating the leather that used to bind books, cover books. They're desperate. So you have all of these things at play, and it's so interesting how everything coalesces and comes together and kind of mobs, plus the magic system, while they're trying to figure it out for themselves. You're kind of learning about it yourself, and it's just a really good introduction into the way that Brandon Sanderson structures his novels, as well as his use of the magic systems, and a really good introduction to the Cosmere generally. So if you are looking to get into Brandon Sanderson, I would definitely start with Elantris and then work your way up from there. This is an excellent place to start, and I think my reread of the Cosmere is going to be really fun, because knowing what I know now, having read everything within the Cosmere, hearing things within the early books that I didn't pick up on the first time is really rewarding, and I'm having a really good time. So those were all of the books that I read in June. I would say it was a pretty good reading month. I had a really good time. There were some highs, there were some lows, but what else is new, you know? Let me know if you read any of these books and what you thought of them, but additionally, let me know the scariest book you've ever read and if you would recommend me reading it if I wanted to do something like read something that actually freaked me out. Because I'm left so unsatisfied from A Flicker in the Dark. I still want something scary to read. The next book in the Cosmere I'm going to be reading is Tress of the Emerald Sea, and I am also listening to Mistborn Era 1 right now via audiobook, so my Cosmere reread will continue, as well as reading some recent releases, especially books that are coming in the book boxes that I am subscribed to. So look forward to that in July, and I will see you guys next time. Bye! If you have not seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, you need to turn this thing off right now, go sit down and watch it.